Good afternoon. I hope you're doing well. Today we're going to take a look at the lesson plan template for assessments. This is part 3 of a series. We're going to be talking about informal, formal, formative, and summative, and they're not the same things. Okay, taking a look at this nice chart that Dr. Norma Hogan developed, we can see that we can split up formative and summative, informal and formal, by remembering that formative has to do with purpose and summative has to do with purpose. So these are the purposes of assessment. Whereas when we talk about informal and formal, we're speaking of types or format of the assessment. So let's talk about the purposes. Formative and summative describe the purpose of assessment. So a good way to think of it is that a formative assessment is when the chef tastes the soup, and a summative is when the guests taste the soup. So basically what you have is the chef tasting the soup, and if it's good enough, he serves it. But most of the time when a chef tastes the soup, he's going to add a little dash of this or a little dash of that. And then they serve it to the guests. So that's the difference. This happens during instruction to help you monitor and adjust your instruction. And the summative comes at the end. And at this point, the guests are going to eat the soup. It's not going to go back into the soup pot and fixed, I hope, after the guests have been eating on it. No, I don't think so. I think what's going to happen is that they're going to just say, okay, next time you make it, you might want to add more salt and that sort of thing. So let's take a look at this next one. A formative assessment helps us do monitor our own teaching and the students' learning. So it's part of the scaffolding process. So that means that as students are learning, we're assessing them and assessing them and assessing them and assessing them. And this can all be done in one class period. Formative assessments happen all the time. And they don't always look like a test, like a quiz, or or anything that you would particularly. It could be thumbs up or thumbs down. It could be a self-assessment. It's a lot of ways, but it helps us know how our instruction is going. But summative comes at the end. Let's look at the difference here. Formative occurs during instruction, and summative occurs after. Formative is frequent, it's ongoing and daily. Summative occurs at a particular point in time. The students know every Friday we have a vocabulary quiz, or it's going to be a test at the end of the chapter, or the benchmark test, whatever you are working toward. In relation to grading, formatives might be graded, but they're generally used for feedback. Sometimes teachers will put a check mark on them, or they will write feedback, but a summative is actually in some way evaluated or graded. Formative assessment can include active engagement, whereas with summative it's passive. So there's some examples and more about the purpose here, but I think you're starting to get the idea. So here's the chart kind of taken a bit further. Here we have the purpose of the assessments. So a formative, the purpose is to inform the teacher of student progress so that the teacher can monitor and adjust instruction. It occurs during instruction, and it may or not be graded. It might just be checked or given feedback on, but not necessarily graded. Summative assessment, it's a way to evaluate their achievement of learning objectives. So there's an evaluation going on. The purpose is to provide documentation or data concerning that learning. And it's graded or otherwise documented. Informal. So an informal assessment is one that's like asking questions and seeing who raises their hand, or playing a game and noticing which students know the answers, doing cahoots and seeing who gets what right. Going around the classroom while the students are working and just looking at their work as you walk through, just scanning across their desks, having students do signals, thumbs up, thumbs down, or maybe you're doing like the first, second, or third answer and they're holding up their fingers or whatever. Just easy things like that. Those are informal assessments. You plan them, but you might not plan them. It might just be something that you just put into your lesson at that moment. You think, are they getting it? And so, you say, okay, let's do this and see how we're coming along. And maybe you'll have them do a math problem, and just kind of off the cuff. A formal formative. So that's I've just described informal formative. A formal formative is, it could be bell work, it could be an exit ticket, it can be homework, it can be in-class practice, it can be notes, something that you've planned. You've planned it as a formative assessment. That's what makes it formal. Maybe you've planned these too, but look at the difference between asking questions and walking around scanning work with homework, in-class practice. So these are things that we consider formal. There might be some others that you can think of. A summative assessment generally comes at the very end of instruction, usually graded, otherwise it has some sort of documentation. By definition, a summative assessment cannot be informal because you've planned it, you've designed it. So that's not informal. But all summative assessments are formal. Okay? That could be a quiz, a test, an essay, a presentation, a project, a lab report. It could be a standardized test. So when we're looking at this, it's not reasonable to expect that a summative will occur for each lesson. So when your supervisor comes to observe you, I hope to goodness you aren't having them sit in the back of the classroom and watch you give a test. So we should not have our supervisors come to see you give a summative assessment. However, you're not going to leave summative blank on your lesson plan. What you need to do is to describe the summative that you're working toward. So what's coming up? Is there a test on, I'm trying to think of something math and I'm drawing a blank. Is there a test on, I'll just go to history. Is there a test on the beginning of World War II that you're going to give? Or is there a test on the Great Depression that you're going to give? And if so, what does that test look like? Is it multiple choice? Is it fill in the blank? Is it essay? So what is your summative on that you're working toward here with this lesson? And when's it going to be given? And what kind of summative it is? Because whatever summative you're preparing the students for makes a difference, because you're going to prepare students differently for an essay than that they have to write without any materials than you would prepare them for a multiple choice test. So don't leave that blank, but it shouldn't be something where the supervisors would see that day. Now here we have the evaluation rubric that's going to be used by the supervisors when they come in to observe you. They will look at your lesson plan and they will use this. So to meet expectations, you want to make sure that your assessments that you write are appropriate. So they fit with what you're doing, and they fit in with what you're doing, and they assess what they should assess, and they provide evidence that for you while you're monitoring the whole class. So you want to make sure that it shows that you're doing informal assessments throughout the lesson so that you can evaluate them, that it aligns with the objectives and the standards. Your assessments also, if you want to have exemplary ones, you can tell that you describe how you are addressing individuals or small groups of students with specific needs. For example, you might say, okay, this particular group of students is going to do theirs written, but this other group is going to do, they're going to tell their answers to someone else. You want to make sure, again, that it aligns with lesson objectives and state standards. Academic feedback. So on your template, you'll notice it says academic feedback. How will you give academic feedback? How will your academic feedback promote student understanding of the learning objective? So we want to get out of the habit of just putting X's and check marks, or smiley faces and other marks that really don't tell the student anything except good, bad, right, wrong. What we want to do is to start providing academic feedback that gives the students more information. What did they do right? What did they do that they need to work on? What do they need to change in order to do better? So you want to describe how you're going to give them feedback on their assessments, or on their informal and formal assessments. And you want to provide a strategy for that. For example, you could provide them with a strategy. You could say, okay, I know students are going to have trouble with this, so if that happens, I'm going to give them this alternative strategy for working the problem. So just taking a look at this, especially in the beginning, as you and your supervisor have you write more and more lesson plans, you can discuss these particular parts of the rubric in more detail. Now, this is the one of my pet peeves. There's on your lesson plan, there's a box where you're supposed to address assessment and evaluation modifications. And I get all kinds of folks, especially some that are in AP classes or in advanced classes, very arrogantly, I don't mean to say that, well, it's true, because you know me, I'm going to say the truth, and they're very arrogant and say, well, Miss Rock, I don't have any IEP or 504 students in my class, so all of them are all going to take the same class. I'm sitting there thinking, oh, Lord, please. I'm just kidding. I sort of do that, but maybe not. But anyway, so the IEP students and the 504 students, yes, you certainly want to make sure you meet their modifications if you don't have them. But don't sit there and tell me that you don't have, even in your AP class, some underachieving students. And you definitely should have some advanced learners. You may have some learners with academic gaps. Did you have any students that have been, come from a different school, or move up from change their schedule? Attendance issues, they're rampant. Unmotivated learners. Do you have any ESL, ELL? But a lot of students think they're off the hook for this section because they don't have IEP, 504, or ESL students. And I'm saying no one's off the hook. because all of your students are different, and you need to think about those differences in your assessments. So just like this little classroom here, some are going to really enjoy, writing and thinking. Some will want to build, and some like to read. Some want to sleep. Some are going to be just really being goofy. Some enjoy working in partners, and some are going to be off in their own little world. So when you think about your class, I want you to think about all the differences and how can you make an assessment that's going to address some of those differences. Now, I also have had students tell me that they're not allowed to have a different kind of assessment for a student unless that student has an IEP or 504. Well, that might be the practice of where you are in your placement. If that's so, then that's unfortunate, because I'd hate to think that we have to get legal eagles involved and legal paperwork involved in order for us to do what's right. And what it's right is to have assessments that meet the needs of all the different kinds of learners in our classroom. So don't leave that blank. So then you want to write a justification. So notice here, this is a great way to think about it. If you get to the end of your lesson plan, you're starting to write justifications, you can write things like this. I'm giving my students an exit slip as a formal assessment because I need to be able to assess their grasp of today's lesson. This is appropriate because, that's how I know it's justification. Today's objective of is a prerequisite skill for tomorrow's learning. And then you can put a citation by just, putting like Marzano 2014 or something like that. I have designed an alternative assessment for my advanced student that gives him the option of blank. This is supported by who stated and then give a citation. So thank you very much for your attention today, and I hope that you remember that we want to talk about informal and formal assessments and as types of assessments. And when you write your EdTPA, those are the only two terms that they bring up in the EdTPA. And remember that an informal assessment could be formative, and that's all it's going to be. But a formal assessment could be formative or summative. I hope that you have a very nice rest of your day.